Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Sunday, July 5th, 2020, 9:30 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Well, we had our Harryhausen weekend last weekend, so we weren't doing rules retrospective, and prior to that, we had a 7-part series on DM Prada's 2006 version 2.2 Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Initiative and Combat Tables, which really was rules, not tables. There was more to it than just tables. Nevertheless, it was what it was. We went through all of that. We had some minor quibbles with some of the interpretations, although for the most part a lot of it was word for word. It was just reorganized in a way that helped make it flow and make sense. It really is an excellent document. Like I say, the only times we got tripped up were minor, and they were about semantics, where a word here or there might have helped make things clear, a little more clear than it already was. So really not a lot of changes would have been suggested if I'd been in on that process myself, which I wasn't. Not that I should have been asked. It must have been a very daunting task, as anyone who didn't grow up with but looked back on original D&D or even first edition advanced Dungeons and Dragons and came at it without being introduced to it by other people, just came at the texts, it would have been incredibly difficult. And a document like what we were looking at over those 7 weeks is meant to substitute for being introduced to it, is meant to lay bare and clear and transparent what the text is supposed to be telling you. And as far as that goes, I think it does an excellent job. I would recommend that document to anybody getting involved in first edition, whether they come at it from another version of D&D or just picking it up fresh. It's not a substitute. I think one still needs to have the actual first edition books in front of you, at least the core books. And I think it's also understood that a lot of what is added to that in the source material, what's added to the core books, is stuff that just clarifies, makes it plain, helps explain what the original core books are meaning to express. So what do we have here? We got ourselves a lovely day. There's that David L. Pancake background, if you're ever interested in grabbing something from an artist. David L. Pancake does a great job. You can look him up on the internet, or I believe I should have a link in the show notes when this is all done. And you'll find this particular image is called Wizard's Study. There's more to it. It extends up higher and down lower. But this section of it, I think, works really well for what I'm using it for here as a background for a show. It gives me room to put more stuff up there. Years ago, when they were first available, when RPG Now was a thing on its own, in the early days, before Drive-Thru RPG, before OBS, before any of the rest of that became part of the scene, RPG Now stood alone as James Matthews' first effort to create an e-publisher's conduit to customers. So it was a PDF sales site, an e-tailer. It sold electronic products back then only. I don't think you could. When you first set up, they weren't using any of that print on demand. It was straight up PDFs only, or images. I think there were some people that were selling portraits and stock art in the form of image files, often zipped up into a zip file. But mainly it was PDFs, not even ebooks or stuff like that wasn't around. This is the early 2000s. And when James first got Wizards of the Coast to buy into this idea of e-publishing or selling PDFs of products, I think it was Mr. Butler, Jim Butler. Was it Jim? I think it was Jim Butler who got the unenviable task as a Wizards employee to coordinate the scanning of all the old products they had in archive that they had full rights to, putting them together as PDF products and turning them over to James to be uploaded and for a blurb, something off the back cover to be put in there, and prices, and get them up and get them done. And he enlisted a handful of us, James did, to help him out with getting these onto the site as swiftly as possible. And we didn't take payment for it. I think we were offered an option to take some low amount of payment or some higher amount of in-kind store credit. And folks like me took tons of store credit and bought as many of the PDF products that were available that I was interested in at the time, including what was the original core books, the first edition books, a handful of source books. I wasn't big on the adventure modules because I always had my own setting and always created my own adventures within that setting. So I didn't get a lot. I think I maybe picked up a few of the classics, Keep on the Borderlands and Giant Series, things like that. But what I did get, what I did want and what I did get were the original little booklets, and of course first edition as well. Now you'll note that on this placard I do say rules retrospective 1E AD&D classes and fighters in particular, and that is definitely by design. I fully intend to, let's do it like this so it stays off to the side. I fully intend to be looking at this specifically as a first edition thing, since that's what I run. But I think we need to go back to original. Let's see if I wonder if that's visible. Yeah, maybe not. No, that's too far back. One of the things I think I've mentioned in the past was the idea of original plus advanced. This is a concept whereby, because those of us who started with original D&D, hey Red Barn Games, good morning, in the chat, because those of us who started with original, then moving to advance, were given the core books for first edition over 3 years, 77, 78, and 79, and we got them in the order of Monster Manual, then Player's Handbook, then Dungeon Master's Guide. We were essentially doing something called Original plus Advanced for a couple of years before fully embracing and being able to switch over to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. So we started off with the original booklets and then incorporated the others as they came out. Now, Monster Manual was pretty easy. Most of the stats, you knew what they were supposed to mean and what they were supposed to be. They were explained within, so if there was some expansion, and there was a little bit beyond original, just the idea of varying hit dice, right? Changed things up a little bit because not everything was a D6 anymore. And so, there were a number of adjustments to make, but just the wealth of new monsters and detailed explanations of monsters, even ones we already had, the expansive section on dragons, on giants, on the information on lycanthropy, golems, they're just dinosaurs, just a ton of different things on which we just got a whole bunch more information that was expanded upon but not contradicting the original rules that we had. Now, when it comes to what we got going in original for classes, right? Characters, as mentioned in the Men in Magic book, the second being more about creatures, and the last third being more about campaigns. This was all the DM and player information on what characters should be, how to create them, and what they are. And there's first some information. Of course, there's a nice forward, introduction. We've got scope of the campaign, and then we start into equipment. But this is equipment that you'll need to play the game, the dice and 3-ring notebook, graph paper, imagination. Don't forget that. Very important. Quite useful from what I understand, or so I'm told, although I can't imagine. Hey, preparation for the campaign, and then we start to get into the characters, and there are 3 main classes of characters. You've got fighting men, hyphenated, magic users, hyphenated, and clerics, no hyphen needed. Fighting men, here's all the information you need, right? It includes the characters of elves and dwarves and even hobbits, because they are by default fighting men. Magic users include only men and elves. Elves can also by default be magic users and or both. Really, clerics are limited to men only, that is to say humans. All non-human players are restricted in some aspects and gifted in others. This will be dealt with in the paragraphs pertaining to each non-human type. So, the idea behind D&D is that it's a fairy tale fantasy world where humans are our way in. Human beings, in all their glory, are the thing that everything revolves around. Elves are statted up or treated in relation and in comparison to humans. So if they have a little higher intelligence or dexterity or a little lower strength or constitution, whatever it is, that is relative to what human beings as the norm are meant to be. So, with all that in mind, fighting men. All magical weaponry is usable by fighters, and this in itself is a big advantage. In addition, they gain the advantage of more hit dice, the score of which determines how many points of damage can be taken before a character is killed. That's the first explanation of hit dice, right? Comes in the fighting men section. They can use only a very limited number of magic items of the non-weaponry variety. However, they can use no spells. Top-level fighters, lords and above, who build castles are considered barons, and as such, they may invest in their holdings in order to increase their income. See the investments section in Volume 3, that is the Campaigns Wilderness Guide, third of the 3 little booklets. Base income for a baron is a tax rate of 10 gold pieces per inhabitant of the barony per game year. So, there we go. The explanation of fighting men is as much originally about where they fit into an overarching campaign as to what they are in and of themselves. He doesn't talk about other equipment. It talks in terms of magical equipment. It talks in terms of magic items. It talks in terms of long-term, if you live, this is what you can do with your character when you hit the highest levels. And it talks a little bit prior to that paragraph in terms of how elves, dwarves, and even hobbits are tied to. Now, remember, this is something that changed to halflings later on. But when this was first done, this is what was put up on the site. Clerics, dwarves, and don't forget first magic users are back here. Just this little section here. Then we've got this whole section here, which includes some stuff on for magic users because of spells being a little longer. Clerics, then down here, forgot to bold that clerics, it looks like. We get into dwarves after that. Elves, says halflings here, notice. So they had already started switching with this printing. And then other character types. Now, this section here is interesting because this is something I don't conform to in my own personal games. Other character types, there is no reason that players cannot be allowed to play as virtually anything, provided they begin relatively weak and work up to the top. I.e., a player wishing to be a dragon would have to begin as, let's say, a young one and progress upwards in the usual manner, steps being predetermined by the campaign referee. And, well, that, in a lot of campaigns, might be the norm. Hey, I want to play a centaur. All right, we'll figure it out. I've always been a little more narrow. When I run first edition games, I don't use half orcs. I cut out a couple of the classes in assassins and monks. Alignments, no evil. So with those restrictions, you narrow campaign, I think, to being a little more Western European oriented, which is the type of campaign that I happen to run, and a little more heroic in that it's meant to be a game about good versus evil when I run it. It's meant to be about heroism. The player characters, they may start off as little wet behind the ears, but they are meant to eventually become heroes after a fashion and be protecting people that need it and performing great deeds of heroism and going on quests and all the rest of that stuff that heroes do in legends and myths and tales of heroism. Over here we get into law, neutrality, and chaos. This is the only 3 alignment possibilities in original D&D, so when we get into AD&D and we add in alignments of good and evil axes on the alignment charts, then that messes things up a little bit, in my opinion. Look at this. Evil high priests are men of chaos, or people of chaos. So some of these creatures are on chimeras, for instance, or on neutral and chaos. Men, of course, are on all 3 because they can be anything. Patriarchs offset evil high priests. Patriarchs meant to be good high priests. The more I've been thinking about it lately, the more I've been thinking about just eliminating alignment altogether in my games. I use it behind the scenes to gauge where I think player characters are, so that I might allow NPCs and sentient beings that run into them when they have their reactions to get a sense of what they are. But aside from that, I really don't use it much at all anyway. So this whole idea of whole races that are evil or whole races that are good, or species or beings, sentient beings that are all of one alignment or another, I've never been that way anyway. Player characters tend to run into more evil of various races and species and sentient beings, because that's the name of the game. It's about heroics, and it's a fiction, and within a fiction you need conflict, and to have these conflicts and obstacles for the player characters to overcome, they're just naturally going to run into the worst of the worst when it comes to other things they run into. Certainly, unless they're spending all their time in a town, most of the humans they run up against are going to be neutral or evil. So, when it comes to any other group, whether you want to call them another race or another, in the legendary sense, in that they are another species. Centaurs are a race, right? But they are actually a different species in kind of modern terminology. So too, but if we group them all as sentient beings versus animals and monsters, are dogs sentient beings? I suppose. I don't know. There's kind of some areas there where at some point you have to draw a line, because you need to be able to quantify them within game terms, not because of some predetermined idea of what they should or should not be. Whether that's elves or orcs or centaurs or pixies, dryads, whatever it is, you need to be able to divvy those up to apply mechanics to them and to make them function as, pieces on an elaborate chessboard. In this case, Law, Neutrality, and Chaos was the original. But let's get back to Fighting Men, because we're getting low on time here. We'll come back and talk about first edition fighters next time, and use this as an introduction to the full series. We'll probably be able to squeeze in more on the various classes when we deal with fighters next time. The 1E first edition AD&D fighters. We'll look at the subclasses too. We'll be looking at Rangers and Paladins as well as first edition fighters. Not fighting men, but fighters. So, Ink Dweller 8, hey, good morning. LexFire22, welcome as well. Thanks for coming out. I guess you three are the first three going on the list for week 15. Can you believe it? I've been doing this for 15 weeks. That's quite a while, huh? Not bad. This is show number 115. There were a number of days where I actually was doing more than one show, only because the there we go. Clean that up. I want to make sure we get everybody in here. And there we go. Alright, Red Barn Games, Ink Dweller 8, LexFire 22, you are all in for week 15. Week 14, we're going to have to make an announcement tomorrow about who won. Quite a few people involved last week. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 9:30 to get involved there. So, we're good to go for today. I just want to say to everybody, drop that down. Thank you so much for following the channel and getting involved here and being part of the stream. Thanks for chiming in, because when you chime in, you are automatically added into the list for the weekly giveaway, which is free. So it's always worth doing. Don't forget, tomorrow the weekly news, and that's when we announce the giveaway. On Tuesday, cartography and world building. Campaign discussion, mostly around Grimwald, my own setting, on Wednesday. Thursday, terrain crafting and painting miniatures. Friday, building adventures, mostly with an eye toward virtual tabletop adventures, given the state of the world. A DM perspective review of an animated short cartoon on Saturdays. We just did the 5th episode of Conan the Animated series. Those, of course, wind up going through a YouTube process of approval to prove that they're reviews and not just, somebody putting that IP up on YouTube to get free hits. So that often takes a day or two. And then we've got the rules retrospective next Sunday. We'll revisit Fighters with the first edition now that we've looked back. And if you're also someone who catches up with this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe, give us a thumbs up, make a little comment, and we will appreciate it. Well, thanks again, everybody. We will catch you tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.